and we are very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Rabbi Dr. Reichman, who will be addressing us. Rabbi Dr. Reichman is an Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine and Associate Professor of Philosophy and History of Medicine at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine of Yeshiva University, where he teaches Jewish medical ethics. Rabbi Reichman received smicha from REITs at Yeshiva University and writes and lectures widely in the field of Jewish medical ethics. He is the recipient of a Kornfeld Foundation Fellowship and the Rubenstein Prize in Medical Ethics, and was a member of both the board of the Halachic Organ Donor Society and the advisory board of the Institute for Genetics and Public Policy. His research is devoted to many fascinating topics on the interface of medical history and Jewish law, and we are so excited to hear from him.
Thank you so much. A pleasure. It's supposed to be here to cap off your amazing book day. And to do that, we are going to take a book, which some of you may have read, and if you haven't read, it's also okay. And we are going to show how just a simple book has an amazing aspect of halachic issues that relate to us as Jews. The book that we are discussing today is called My Sister's Keeper. Has anybody in this room read My Sister's Keeper? Okay, fair number of you have. Has anybody in this room seen the movie My Sister's Keeper? And this one is for the rest of you. Has anybody seen the book?
The thing that needs to do his source sheet in the copier in the office. Can you bring them in?
So here's what we're going to do today, guys.
Sure.
The theme for today is books and questions. What I'm going to do is, for those of you who haven't read the book, absolutely no worries, because I'm going to read for you a summary for the book. And what we're going to do is, after we read the summary, and I want you to listen to the summary very carefully, I'm going to ask you guys the questions that we need to ask as Jews about the issues that are raised in this book. Now, the issues that are discussed in this book are pretty complicated, pretty fascinating. This book is fiction, but every single aspect of this book can potentially happen in real life. But just keep that in mind as we go through. Now, I don't know, some of you may have handouts. I don't know, for those of you who have handouts, I'm going to read through the... Maybe I'll just wait a moment as we're passing through. And I'm going to start, actually I'll start reading, so pay attention closely as I read through, and we'll use the handouts for the rest of our discussion today. Anna Fitzgerald's older sister Kate. Maybe I'll just wait. I'm going to wait a minute actually till you guys pass it out so you can follow along. So you can follow along. What other lectures did we have today on Book Day?
Well, they had sessions.
They had different sessions.
They had sessions, breakout sessions.
And those 3 books that you sent me, those are books that they're supposed to read.
So those books, the girls choose one of them following book day. So they relate
afterwards.
to themes that came out of the day, and then they'll read a book.
Read that book afterwards. Great. And one of those books was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. How many of you chose that book?
How many chose The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks? Okay, that is a really fascinating book. Also, they just had a movie of that also. They just came out with a movie. For those of you who want to watch the movie, don't tell your teachers. Watch the movie instead of reading the book. But maybe we'll come back and we'll talk about the halachic ramifications of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, because they are amazing and profound. Okay, you guys got your handouts, right? Everybody open up to page, second page. We have our plot summary. We're going to read through it.
We're going to get.
Now, I need you guys to listen because I need you guys to ask me questions. Anna Fitzgerald's older sister, Kate, suffers from leukemia, a cancer of the blood and bone marrow. In order to survive, Kate needs a bone marrow donation. You guys, I'm going to ask you questions. Whatever you don't know, we're going to explain as we go through. Are you guys familiar with what a bone marrow donation is? Anybody ever hear of the concept of bone marrow donation? Great. So we're going to talk about these issues. Kate needs a bone marrow donation. Anna was conceived or created in the laboratory to be a genetic match to her sister in order to harvest blood from her umbilical cord in order to use to treat and saved Kate's life. You guys following me on this one? This is pretty amazing. Although the treatment was initially successful, Kate relapsed, which means she developed the condition, the cancer again. Ever since, Anna, the only compatible family member, has been used as a donor for blood and bone marrow needed to treat Kate, who continues to swing between remission, staying healthy, and relapse, getting sick again, as she grows up. Anna is usually willing to donate whatever Kate needs, but when she is 13, she is told by her parents that she will have to donate her kidney to her sister Anna. The surgery required for both Kate and Anna would be major. It is not guaranteed to work, as the stress of the operation may well kill Kate anyway, and the loss of a kidney could have a serious impact on Anna's life. Until now, Anna's parents made all the medical decisions on her behalf. Now, Anna asks the court for medical emancipation, which means she wants to be allowed to make her own decisions regarding her medical treatment and regarding whether she will donate blood or bone marrow or even a kidney to her own sister. During the trial for emancipation, it is revealed that Kate asked Anna to sue for emancipation because she did not want Anna to have to donate her kidney. She does not want a kidney donation and believes that unfortunately she's not going to survive anyway. The judge rules in Anna's favor and allows her to make her own decisions. However, as she is on her way home after the trial, they get into a car accident. Now, this is fiction, keep in mind. Anna is unconscious and suffers an injury to the head. After some time, the doctors inform the family that very sadly Anna is brain dead, that the machines keeping her alive may as well be switched off, and asks them if they have considered organ donation. Her lawyer tells the doctors there is a girl upstairs who needs the kidney. So now, who is that girl upstairs? That's her sister, Kate. Kate is prepared for surgery. Anna's kidney is successfully transplanted. Kate survives the surgery and goes into remission, meaning her disease is now gone. Most of Anna's usable organs are removed for transplants in the future. This is the story. Now I want you guys, it's a very, again, it's a fictional story, but everything in this story could potentially be true. So I want you guys to ask me, what questions do we as Jews need to ask about everything that happened in this story? Yes?
So we have a Gemara that teaches us pretty much, who are you to say that your blood is redder than anyone else's? So who are the parents to decide which kid should get the marrow donations, get the organ donations over another who could still die in operation?
Excellent. So choosing the kid to give donations, and we'll broaden that even more as we get into other questions. Yes?
Are you, like, one of the questions we could ask is, are you allowed to, it says they created a kid, are you allowed to, like, have a kid for the sole purpose of potentially killing them?
Excellent question. Are you allowed to have a child for the sole purpose of using as an organ donor? The child is going to be an organ donor. Yes, in the back.
Are you allowed to force the child to donate?
Good. Are you allowed to force the child to donate? So Kate, when she was younger, was basically forced to be a blood donor, a bone marrow donor, and then ultimately possibly even a kidney donor, which she didn't want to do. Yes?
If the judge already ruled that she had medical emancipation, why were her parents allowed to decide having to go forward?
Good question. So if she received medical emancipation, why were they allowed to take her organs after she died? So we're hopefully going to get to some, if not all, of these questions. These are all excellent questions. Yes, in the way back.
Is organ donation even permissible at all?
Is organ donation even permissible at all? Are we halachically allowed to serve as an organ donor? And there are different types of organ donation. There's organ donation while you're alive, which Kate did. You know, blood donation, bone marrow donation, kidney donation. And then there's organ donation after one dies, which is what they considered at the very end of the story. Yes?
Another question is that, is it fair to put like one child in so much danger just to possibly save another child?
Excellent. Putting one child in danger to possibly save another child. These are all fantastic questions, and virtually every one of these questions are discussed by the postgame on these issues. Yes?
Are you allowed to turn the machine off and make the child die, like, not naturally, like pull blood? Can I do that?
So you're talking at the very end,
Yeah,
in order to harvest the organs.
They like made her die.
Ah, it's a good question. So this is something we may not get to because this is a little medically complicated, but she was diagnosed, Kate was diagnosed as having a particular condition called brain death. And the question is that particular condition or that particular situation, are they allowed to harvest organs? Is that the same as somebody's heart that stops? And can they turn off the machine in that case? Can they not turn off the machine? If they turn off the machine, are they actually killing her in order to harvest the organs? That's a question, I apologize, we may or may not get to that question, but that is absolutely a question which is discussed by the rabbis on these issues. Yes?
Don't they require informed consent for things like this?
The question is, don't they require informed consent for things like this? The answer is a resounding yes, and we'll discuss what informed consent is, and whether informed consent, to whom does it apply, when does it apply, and when can you waive that informed consent? We'll take one last question, and then we'll start working through these issues.
Did she die like after the car accident, or was it like how if she was ready, that like how she was only like going with her organs, like if her organs are dead, how she was.
Oh, very good question. Did she die right after the car accident? If her organs are dead, how can they use her organs? Again, that's a question which I apologize we may not get to, and I'm happy to answer those questions afterwards if we don't. But these are all fantastic questions, and you basically covered almost everything I had anticipated that we were going to discuss, and we'll see maybe a few others along the way. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going through these issues. Do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask me questions as we're going through, both to clarify if I say something medical that requires clarification, or if you have questions just about how things proceed. So let's start with the very first aspect of our case. Kate was actually brought into this world to be a donor to her sister. First of all, is that possible? Is it medically possible today, in the 21st century, to create a human being that would be a specific match to somebody else who is alive? You guys are looking a little perplexed. Like, how is that possible? How would you even do something like that? It sounds like science fiction. So let me explain that it actually is possible, and I'll share with you the following case. It's actually a couple of cases. So on the bottom of this is actually our page, our second page, the same page as the plot summary. Our halachic issue number 1 is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and the savior sibling. There's a lot of terms over here which may not be familiar to you. Just from my knowledge, and I assume the answer is going to be mostly no, has anyone ever heard of the term pre-implantation genetic diagnosis? So a couple of hands are going up. We're going to explain exactly what that is. It's really a remarkable technology. So let me share with you the following. About 25 years ago, there was a family called the Ayala family, and their child had a particular cancer of the blood. And the only way you could treat that cancer is if they received a bone marrow donation from someone who is a, quote, match. And why do they need a bone marrow donation? Because when there's a problem with the blood, with a bone marrow donation, you can literally take blood from some other person and insert that into the bone marrow of the individual with cancer and replace their entire bone marrow with a healthy bone marrow and potentially cure them completely. Now, I said you need to be a match. So there has to be a specific match, because if it's not a match, your body will reject the bone marrow transplant. And the scientists figure out exactly, based on the blood and based on the genetics, whether this person is a match or not. Now, sometimes there are literally no matches from anybody existing that's offered to donate bone marrow. And you can check across the entire world, and literally nobody would have a match. So what do you do in that case? So that's a pretty sad case, because then the person may not be able to be treated. So what this family did is, thankfully the cancer wasn't so severe that the person was going to succumb to the cancer very quickly. They had time. So they actually had a child in the natural way. And there was a hope that the child that they had would actually be a match to the existing child they had with cancer. And there's a 1 in 4 chance that any sibling will be a match to an existing sibling. So it turned out, as Hashgacha would have it, that the child that they had was actually a match to their existing child. And they did bone marrow harvest. They took the bone marrow from that little baby and they transplanted it to the bone marrow of the child that had the cancer and completely cured the child. Now fast forward into the 21st century. They did things naturally, and there was only a 1 in 4 chance that they would find an exact match. Today, in the 21st century, we don't need to take those chances. We can actually determine with certainty that a child can be a potential match. Now, how do you do such a thing? So this is a very complicated technology. I'm going to simplify, and I apologize for simplifying. But in essence, it goes like this. They can take the reproductive seed of the man and the woman and fertilize it in the laboratory and create a human embryo in the laboratory. Now, I'm going to ask you to turn to page 1 for a second. If you look in the top middle of that page, what you are looking at is a human embryo. It's an 8-cell human embryo. And as you look, there's 4 slides over there, but we'll focus on the first 3. As you look at the very top one, you'll see there's a pipette that's coming from the right side that's about to touch the embryo. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see the pipette is beginning to extract a cell from the embryo. And in the third slide, the cell is entirely extracted from the embryo. And what this technology does is as follows. Now listen to this. The potential for this is really staggering. So this is the human embryo. So they can take human embryos that have been fertilized in the laboratory. They can remove a cell from the human embryo and send it to the laboratory and test all the genetics of that cell. So they can test, is it a boy, is it a girl? They can test, does it have a genetic defect, does it not have a genetic defect? And they can also test if it is a match to a person that needs a bone marrow donation. That's what they can do today. And this is called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis because it's before the embryo is implanted into the woman, and it's genetic diagnosis, and they do what's called genetic diagnosis, which is absolutely fascinating. Now, you can do this for anything. So let's say, for example, you could do this to choose the gender of your child. You could do this for genetic defects. Let's say you wanted your child to have more intelligence or certain color eyes or a certain height. In theory, you could use this technology to do that kind of thing also. These are questions whether it's halachically permissible to do such a thing or not to do such a thing. But in short, for our discussion, the poskim are pretty clear that to produce a child for the purpose of saving another child is absolutely halachically permissible. Now, are there any reasons why you would think it shouldn't happen? Anybody have a reason why to think you shouldn't do such a thing? Yes? Go ahead.
Is it picking one life over the other?
So it's picking one, but are you indeed picking one life over another? Think about it. I mean, you may be yes, maybe no, but anyone else have objections? Yes?
Because you're bringing someone into the world only to use them like as an object, this is something you can just take things from. It's not like you're even giving them a true life.
Ah, excellent. So you're bringing someone into this world to use them as an object. So let me share with you exactly your point. So this is a very new technology. Rabbis have only begun to discuss this over the last few years. But here you have one particular Shaila and Tshuva, which was posed from Yaakov Ariel from Ramat Gan in Israel, is a very prominent rabbinic authority. And they asked him about this. So if you look on the bottom right-hand side, it's Siman Yud Aleph, Holedet Yeled L'Tzorech Refuat Achiv. Giving birth to a child or producing a child, this is on page 3. So it's the page where it says in big letters on pre-implantation diagnosis for Fanconi anemia on the top of that page. So on the bottom of that page, there is a tshuva by Rabbi Yaakov Ariel. And here's what he says. He says, Yeshu lai makom b'chol zot lehatir et habat hayeled hanosaf l'olam. B'tnai barur sheholadeto tihye b'ikar l'shem atzmo v'rak kematara mishnit tihye hatzalat ha'ach. So this is something which a number of you expressly stated, and this is exactly his concern. So the translation is, it goes, it may be permitted to actually create a child for the sole purpose of treating another child, but you have to create that child for the purpose of that child primarily, and only as a secondary purpose to help treat the sibling. And he agrees with you. He said you shouldn't create a child, you shouldn't bring a child in this world just to be an object, just to be a donor. So that's not acceptable. And he adds, and it's very fascinating, I'm not sure if it's possible to do such a thing, but I'm skipping to the second column. It's if you can follow along, fine, if not, great. But the last 3 lines of the second column of his tshuva, v'hadavar lo yivada lo le'olam, meaning that his stipulation is, you could indeed create a child to save another child, but you should never, ever tell the child that they were conceived for that purpose. They should never know. What do you guys think of that?
I think in a way it just raises the child in deception. Because if you're going to have a child to be like the quote-unquote savior sibling, at the same time they should at least understand why they have to go through all this medical treatments that aren't necessary for them but are necessary for their sibling. It kind of makes them feel bad in comparison. Like, oh look, we get to go in for another treatment. Why me? I don't know. Like, if you're going
Excellent point. Let me just clarify, actually, because the usual scenario where it would be, and your point is very well taken, let me clarify to help understand, because if you're taking all these donations, they're going to start asking questions. But in a lot of the scenarios, the real medical scenarios, you do one donation at the beginning of life, and that's curative forever. So if that was indeed the scenario, then would you think the same way? You might not. Let me just get some others who wanted to do it. There was someone over here who wanted to ask a question?
No, I was going to comment what you said, that it's just for cord blood.
Right, correct. Yes, all the way in the back.
Is leukemia genetic?
I'm sorry?
Leukemia.
Is leukemia genetic? So the answer is yes and no. Some leukemias are genetic and some are not. In some the genetics has been identified, in some it hasn't. So, but that's an excellent question. So let's move. Let me take one more from someone who hasn't spoken. Yes.
I really think the opposite of things is psychologically damaging for a person to know that they weren't brought into the world because the parents want another child to love, that they were brought to kind of like save someone else's life. I think that's kind of wrong. You know?
Right. So that's his concern. That's precisely his concern. That's why he says you should never tell a child. It becomes complicated. I'm just going to share with you, and I'm not going to take responses to this, but just to think about. Let's say it turns out that the procedure is not successful. The child was conceived for this, and unfortunately the sibling didn't survive. How does that impact the equation? How does this child going to be viewed from now on? Is it potentially a positive thing? Is it potentially a negative thing? Okay, I'll take your.
Okay. So I feel like that's a really big problem because the parents specifically like not specifically because it says not for the sole reason of like bringing them to safe, but like also because they want a child, but it could like work out in their favor that it could save their other child. So I think that it's negative for the child that was born because it was unsuccessful, and from that point on, it's kind of like a chip on their shoulder, like, hey, like we wanted you to like save your sibling, and like now we didn't. Like we went through all of this, and it like didn't even work, and that's that's so disheartening.
That is very true, and there is a real potential concern that it could have very negative psychological impact on the child, which is why this posting specifically says that. Let's go to number 2 on the bottom of this page. Blood and bone marrow donation from a minor. Anna, the only compatible family member, has been used as a donor for any other substance, which means blood donation and bone marrow donation, as Kate continues to swing between disease and relapse as she grows up. So one of your questions was, let's take back a step. Here we're talking about donating blood, donating bone marrow, donating kidneys. Is it halakhically okay to be an organ donor? How many people think it's halakhically okay to be an organ donor? There are 2 types of organ donation. There's organ donation when you're alive, called living organ donation, and there's organ donation after death, which is called cadaveric organ donation. The discussions in the halachic literature are very different for both of them. We're going to focus today on living organ donation. So the Torah teaches us, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Don't stand by if someone's sick. You have to intervene. You have to do something. You have to try and treat them. That involves you doing something to help save somebody. But the question is, how much risk do you have to take? And this is something that a number of you mentioned as well. How much risk do you have to take to actually save somebody's life? So there are different types of donations that are done. Well, first of all, what do you think can be donated from a living human being? What organs can be donated?
Definitely kidney.
Kidneys. Bone marrow, excellent. Blood, good. So you covered the main ones. But there's one more. Liver, partial liver can be donated from one living human being to another. So these are the major organs that can be donated. So from the halachic perspective, and I apologize that we're not going to have time to get into the halachic sources today, but trust me, there's an analysis of the extent of risk one has to accept in order to save somebody's life. So you have to accept a limited amount of risk. But you don't have to accept, and not only don't have to, you're forbidden to put yourself in a huge amount of risk to save somebody else's life. So blood donation, yes, you have a question?
I just have a question that relates to that, and also the whole thing of bringing a child into the world to
Yeah.
save their sibling. What if the sibling needs a heart transplant?
Oh, what if the sibling needs a heart transplant? So heart, you can't donate as a living person to another. So,
Right.
so could you bring, this is an excellent question, could you create a child and then sacrifice that child? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Kind of. Okay, that's an extreme case. And by the way, there's some interesting short stories. There's a short story called The Lottery, where I don't know how many of you have read. Some of you knowing response there, for those who read the Lottery. But it's an interesting philosophical question. I don't want to go there at this stage, because that will take us, I think, in a slightly different direction. With new technologies, by the way, we may be able to create just organs without having to create actual people. With stem cell research, with cloning technology, we might be able, in the laboratory, even with 3D printing, to literally 3D print a kidney, which might be able to be transplanted, so that we won't have to even have these kinds of discussions. Those are all excellent discussions. So is it halachically permitted? Yes?
To answer Abuba's question, you can't, like there's a Gemara that says you can't set aside one soul for another. So you can't technically create one soul to set aside that soul. Like you can't create another human to kill that human.
There's your answer. You're not allowed to be sacrifice one nefesh for another nefesh. Ein dochi nefesh mipnei nefesh. And you can't kill someone to save another. But the question is, if it was in utero, let's say you could harvest it from the fetus before it actually became a full life, then there is what to discuss. So are you allowed to donate live organs? So the short answer is you're allowed to. Blood donation, not very risky, so you're definitely allowed to donate. Bone marrow donation, are you allowed to donate bone marrow? So bone marrow donation used to be more risky, because back like 20 years ago, your bone marrow actually sits inside your bones. So to access the bone marrow, they literally had to take a drill, and they still do that today, and to access the bone marrow from your bones, you needed general anesthesia to do that, and it was a pretty risky procedure. Today, they can actually harvest, I'll get to your question in a second. Today they can actually harvest stem cells from your blood. You guys study stem cells in biology at all? Yes, no? For those of you who've studied stem cells, your bone marrow contains what are called stem cells. Those stem cells are early developmental cells. They can regenerate an entire bone marrow. So you can literally harvest just a few stem cells, and you can implant those into a bone marrow of someone else, and they can regenerate an entire bone marrow in another person. So you're allowed to donate blood, you're allowed to donate bone marrow. How about kidneys? How about donating kidneys? How risky is it to donate a kidney? Yes?
Well, I think the Gemara in Yerushalmi says that you're in a suffix sakana, which means you're maybe in a sakana, but he's definitely in a sakana.
Right, excellent. So you mentioned in Yerushalmi that if a person is in a vadai sakana, and you are just a suffix sakana, that you may be obligated to take that risk. But the truth of the matter is, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin like that in Yerushalmi, but you are absolutely correct. Then the question is, how much of a risk do you have to actually take? Now the kidney donation, what do you know about kidney donation? What do you want to offer about kidney? I'm sorry? So the response was, is that you have 2 kidneys, and you can survive perfectly well with 1 kidney. But that is absolutely true. And I'll clarify that in a second. Yes?
Also, any surgery,
Any surgery is risky. So you guys are you're both right. You're right and you're right. What is different between blood and bone marrow on one side of the chalkboard and or the smartboard and kidney donation on the other? Tell me a difference between the two. Yes, you in the back.
If your other kidney fails, then you're going to need a kidney donation, whereas with blood, you generate it no matter what.
Correct. That's the major difference. Blood regenerates, bone marrow regenerates, which means you take the blood, you take the bone marrow, it's going to come back. If you take a kidney, you only got one kidney left. So if you go into kidney failure, if that one kidney stops working, then it's a risk. So clearly kidney donation is a much higher level of risk, and it's a surgery. Now let me share this with you, and it's just to give you an idea of how risky things are. Anytime you put a scalpel in the abdomen, it's a major risk. So I work at Montefiore Medical Center, which is about 15, 20 minutes from here. We are a major kidney transplant center. And just this afternoon, before I came here, I was treating 2 patients. One patient already had a transplant, one patient's on the transplant list. What happens in the process of kidney donation? You have to open up the abdomen. At Montefiore Hospital, about 3-4 years ago, there was a patient who was donating to her sibling, 40-year-old woman. While on the operating table, the surgeon accidentally nicked the aorta with the scalpel. Now, for those of you who know what the aorta is, those of you who gasped clearly know what the aorta is. The aorta is the largest blood vessel in the body with an extremely high pressure. This woman started to exsanguinate, meaning blood was literally pumping to the ceiling in a matter of a second. And very sadly and tragically, they were not able to repair the aortic tear, and the woman died on the table. Now, kidney donation happens to be a pretty safe procedure, and of the thousands and thousands and thousands of donations that have occurred, this happens extremely rarely. But it does happen, and it can happen. And one needs to consider this when we have these kinds of discussions. Now, you also mentioned, a number of you mentioned child, informed consent. Whenever you go into a hospital and you have any procedure whatsoever, you need to agree to that procedure. You need to say, I want to have this procedure. Now this kid, we're talking about, Kate, when she was 5 years old and giving blood and bone marrow donation, do you think she was consenting to the procedure? Did they ask her? When she was a month old and they harvested her bone marrow, did they ask her at that time? And if they would have asked her, would she have been able to answer even? Would it have been relevant if she answered? Do you have a comment?
The book describes it as they told her that she was going to save her sister. Like it says that they didn't ask her, straight up.
So the question is, how can you do a procedure to somebody without their consent? Without them accepting the procedure? And if you're going to do that procedure, is it okay? So let's take a case like this. This is a real case. It's in your handout. It's from one of the medical journals. Let's say you have a woman who needs a bone marrow transplant. She will not survive without the bone marrow transplant. She has a 2-year-old child. How much longer should we go? I can go and stop. Tell me how much longer you want me to go.
Like 40 minutes.
So you want me to go for another 40 minutes?
I'm a lot of it.
So should I give you 5 minutes? I'll wrap up 5 minutes. Is that good?
We have to,
No, you have that amount of
I have
time.
another 40 minutes.
Another
But
40 minutes.
Oh, great. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, great. So, so where were we? I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, the 2-year-old child. So here's the case. This is a real life case. A woman who needed a bone marrow transplant. The only existing match, was her 2-year-old child. Can you get consent from a 2-year-old child? No. Is donating bone marrow for a 2-year-old child a risky procedure? Yes. Are you going to allow the doctors to harvest? How many people, just by show of hands, think you should allow the harvest from this 2-year-old child? How many people say no? So we got a lot more no's than yeses. Someone who said no, tell me why no. Yes?
Because there's a strong risk involved, so you don't want to put the child in danger.
Good, good. Those who said yes. Anyone who said yes, tell me why you said yes.
Because you need, anyone under happen, and the parent knows what the risks are, but they still say yes to it happening.
So I want you guys, I'm going to ask you all this question. The parents can consent on behalf of the child. Do you think the mother is an appropriate person to ask about consent for this?
Yeah.
What do you think? Because the parents are, have a reason to say one way or another. Yes. Correct. The parent's the person who needs it.
But is there another person?
Correct. So it's a little complicated. So it's one thing to ask consent. Yes.
Well, there's also the father, like, keep that in mind. And in every situation, the parent's always going to be biased about their answer. No one wants to put their child at risk. So yes, there would, in this case, would probably actually be more evenly decided if you think about it, because they're going to have more reasons to actually donate the organ.
Excellent point. I just want to comment, by the way, that the comments in this room are basically the same comments in the medical ethics meetings that take place in the hospital. I just want to say that the level of your comments, the analysis of your comments, your understanding of the issues is really no different than what happens in the hospital for these kinds of cases. Yes? In the long run, it can be good for the daughter. Now, I'm going to rephrase this question. Let's say, we're focusing on the child for a moment. Let's say this child, you do not allow this child to serve as a bone marrow donor because you said the risk to them was too high risk. The mother doesn't survive, God forbid. That child now grows up, and the doctors say, oh, by the way, when you were 2 years old, you had a chance to save your mother with a bone marrow donation, but we decided it was too risky for you. What do you think she's going to say? What do you think she's going to say? Yes, all the way in the back. Why didn't you take that risk? Why didn't you take that risk on my behalf? And there is a concept actually in halacha called zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We benefit individuals. We will do a purchase or some kind of transaction that will benefit somebody if they're absent, if they're not there. Now here, obviously, the child is absent, but the child isn't able to consent. This is a major aspect of consideration. Yes, bone marrow donation is risky, but it's not that risky. You could control the risks. And in fact, it is not such a simple equation. I'm not saying clearly one way or another, but let us move the equation, let us move a little bit later, really into your category of age. Category of age, let's say it's somebody of your rough age, between the ages of, say, 12 and 18, that hasn't hit 18 yet. And that person is the only person who can be a bone marrow donor. How do we deal with that as opposed to the infant, and what's different in that case than different from the infant? You guys know yet?
Well, the parents speak for themselves, but someone who's 11 to 17, they can somewhat understand the situation and make the decision for themselves, even if legally they're not allowed to.
Excellent. So in essence, what you have described is the following. So what she said is, someone in those ages, they have enough intelligence to be able to understand what the procedure is, and enough intelligence to be able to make an educated decision for themselves. And in the legal term, this is called the age of assent. So in the law, there's the age of consent. You can only consent to a procedure if you're the legal age, and legal age may be 18 or 21, depending on what state or what country you're in. But you reach the age of assent at a much earlier age, meaning you understand what the risks are. You understand what the procedure is, and you can make a somewhat reasoned analysis. And in fact, some would argue that to serve as a bone marrow donor or a blood donor, all you need is someone who's old enough to be at the age of assent, which is roughly from, it's going to be different from girls and from guys, and it's going to be different from each individual. Some people have the intelligence at 6 or 7 years old. Some people won't have the intelligence at 15 or 16 years old. So it depends on the individual. But the individual could be able to assist. So some people say that to be a bone marrow donor, you have to be at least the age of assent. But to be a kidney donor, you can't be a kidney donor without that, without being the age of consent. Now, how are things different from a halachic perspective? What is consent and assent as far as we are concerned? Well, let me share with you the following. Let's turn to the page where it says bone marrow donation obligation and compelling. Now, some of you pointed to this aspect as well. We know that Kate was pretty much forced to be a donor for Anna, to give her blood, to give her bone marrow, and she was almost forced to give her kidney. Is it halachically permissible to coerce or to force somebody to be a donor? Is it halachically okay? What do you guys think? So let me share with you the following case. So let's take a case like this. Let's say, I'll put it into like the context. Let's say that in this case in the operating room in Montefiore, where the surgeon nicked the aorta, the person could have survived with the blood transfusion. But it's a small city. The person on the operating room had AB negative blood, very rare blood. Anybody here have AB negative blood? They know? They know? Anybody know your blood type? Anybody know their blood types? I remember, I think I was your age when I found out my blood type, and I was disappointed because I got an A minus. So let's say your blood is AB negative, right? And you're the only person in the entire city that has AB negative blood, and there's a person in the operating room who's losing blood so fast, and if you donate blood, they're going to live, and if you don't, they won't. Are you allowed, in American society, are you allowed to knock on the door for this person and say, I'm going to tie you up and bring you to the hospital and force you to donate blood? Are you allowed to do that? No. Why not? Why can't I do that? Yes?
So it's a free country, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Correct. It's a free country. You don't have to, you don't want to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You don't have to treat somebody if you don't want to. You don't have to stop along the side of the road if you don't want to. And also, if you're an individual who refuses treatment that'll save your own life, you don't have to. So I practice emergency medicine. So I see a lot of life and death cases. And I see people that come into the hospital that could be treated and their lives saved relatively easily. They could get dialysis, they could get antibiotics, they could get a relatively minor surgery. And the patient says, I don't want this. I refuse to have the surgery. What does halacha say in such a circumstance? Is an individual allowed to refuse to have surgery? So in secular law, in American law, the concept of American law is the following. And the word that's used in secular ethics is called autonomy. Autonomy means I rule myself. I am the king, I am the queen. I decide what happens to me. Nobody else decides what happens to me. Is that what halacha has to say or not? So the answer is not necessarily. Halacha doesn't give us that kind of power because we believe that our bodies belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we are here to protect our bodies, to preserve our bodies. And let me ask you the following real-life case question about compelling or coercing. So here's the case. This happened about 2 years in Israel. We're talking about bone marrow donation. Here's how bone marrow donation happens. There was a woman who signed up for a bone marrow drive, and she was found to be an exact match for a man who needed a bone marrow donation. The disease that he had was a very serious disease. She agreed to be a bone marrow donor. And here's how the bone marrow donation transpires. They first irradiate or completely destroy the bone marrow of the person with the cancer. So they literally have no bone marrow whatsoever. Then at roughly the same time, they harvest the bone marrow from the donor. And then, within a few hours' time, they transplant that fresh bone marrow into the recipient and hopefully cure them from their disease. Now here's what happened in this case. This woman agreed to be a bone marrow donor. They started the process and irradiated the recipient. At this stage, she decided she didn't want to donate anymore. Now what happens to an individual whose bone marrow has been irradiated, has no bone marrow whatsoever, if she doesn't go through with the donation? You die. It's a death sentence. What's in your bone marrow? Your bone marrow is your whole immunological system, your whole blood supply. Without bone marrow, you cannot survive. This woman refused to go through with the donation. This was a Jewish woman. Rabbis came from all over the country, knocked on her door, and told her, you must go through with this donation, otherwise this man is going to die. At the end of the day, she maintained her refusal, and the patient died. It's a true story. If this were to happen in America, would you be allowed to force this woman to go through with the donation? What do you think?
Depends if it's unemployment.
Yes, what are your comments, both of you guys?
When you start, once the procedure starts, hasn't she like agreed? Like,
So she agreed. She initially agreed.
But she doesn't like sign anything that like obligates her?
I'm sorry?
Like before they start the procedure, doesn't she sign something like to obligate her?
Yes, she signs. She signs that she was going to do it. Is that enough for us to tie her down and bring her to the operating room? You can't. Yes, did you have a... So she obviously can back out, because she did back out. Now, we don't want her to back out. We think it's terrible that she backed out, but she did. She did back out. And this is what happened, yes?
Doesn't the person who got his bone marrow removed have to agree to the operation also?
Yes, they initially agreed, but they changed their mind.
No, the person who got it removed. The person going under the procedure. He also has to agree.
Yeah, he agreed.
Right, so that means he agreed to have it, and he didn't agree for that to happen, so wouldn't that be going against his consent?
Good point, interesting point, but it still isn't strong enough to force her to do something against her will. Yes?
What isn't she like technically murdering him?
Great question. I'm going to throw that out to you guys. Is she technically murdering him? Is she guilty of murder by not donating? What do you think?
I think that she made a commitment in the beginning. Like, she didn't have to do this from the start. She said she would. If she hadn't said that she would do this, then the man wouldn't have had.
Correct. That's all correct.
Gone, and therefore he might have had some other chance, like maybe another.
That is all correct.
But she gave her commitment to do this, and now it's done. She can't go back. So I think that by not giving him the marrow, then she has some part in him dying.
Some parts, you're being a little vague on me. Is she guilty of murder or not?
Not fully no, because she's not the one that gave him this disease.
She's not the one who gave him disease. She's not the one who technically caused his death. She didn't pull the trigger. Now, this is not an easy question. Yes?
Well, if there were other possible bone marrow donors, then I wouldn't say that per se she murdered him. However, if she was the only possible bone marrow donor, then yes, she murdered him.
So you would say that she's guilty of murder. Can we try her? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think she's allowed to say, like, she's allowed to not sign up to be bone marrow donor. I think it's more that there's already been where the bone marrow
Irradiated, yeah.
She's already been irradiated, so like she has taken away, she's caused what is living life to be taken away, and then she's not giving him anything.
That is all correct. But the question then, and did you want to add to that?
Her inaction caused his death.
So her inaction caused the death. But can you take her to a court of law and try her for murder? The answer is you can't. You can't. She didn't technically kill this. She didn't technically kill this person. But we all believe that she is clearly responsible to some extent. Now, could she be sued in a civil court? And would she lose in a civil court? Probably. But in a criminal court and be sentenced to death, or whatever, be sentenced to be convicted of a crime of murder, she couldn't. Yes, you guys in the back. So what you are alluding to is the concept of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You have a halachic obligation to save somebody if you see somebody is dying. But you're not guilty of murder if you stand there and they die. So you can't be sentenced to death in Beis Din if you don't act. It's a prohibition. You violated arguably either a lav or an asay, either a positive or negative prohibition. But you can't be sentenced to, you can't be convicted of murder because you haven't done anything directly. You have done nothing directly to cause the death of this individual. Yes?
Also, if she would have done it, it would have caused her like that, like it could have likely chances for something bad to happen to her. So in a way, it's kind of like self-defense. Like in the moment, she realized
should say that you want to do this to yourself, and it's kind of like similar to like self-defense, and like if you're self-defending yourself, like in some sort of situation, like it's not your fault for that.
Interesting point, interesting added point. Just something to think about for her also, which may not have been brought home to her in the course of these discussions. She had a risk of donating, but now imagine the rest of this woman's life knowing that she was responsible for what ultimately happened to this man. Imagine every day of her life. So the negative impact of her not donating, to my mind, even though it's a psychological impact and not a physical impact, is probably a far greater impact than had she donated. Yes.
I mean, well, that's true. Also, it's possible that she just doesn't think that way if she already showed that with her actions before. If not
Right, she may
there.
not
So,
think
like,
that
maybe
way,
she
or she also may not have thought it through. But you're right.
But I don't think
It's hard to
people
tell.
make those types of decisions.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Let's take one final one. Anyone? Yes.
It's just that it's kind of like, obviously that it's not really self-defense because she already, obviously, she should have thought this fully through before she like signed it, and not in the last second when it's already too late to do anything, you like start doing self-defense. You already obligated yourself by doing it, so it's not self-defense anymore when you're not, like, you already decided before that it was fine, but then now, right when it's too late, you decide it's not. That's not self-defense.
You guys have argued both sides of the coin over here. Let's now bring it down to the halakhic analysis. Is it halakhically allowed to coerce, to force somebody to donate? Let's take an even simpler case. We're not talking about someone's life as a risk. Let's say the following. Let's say, you guys are not old enough to donate bone marrow, but soon you will be, right? But let's say you sign up for a bone marrow drive, and you get a call. There's an organization called the Gift of Life, which is a fantastic organization which helps find bone marrow donors to people who need bone marrow. And that is a fantastic Jewish organization, and Yeshiva University and Stern, I think, together have more donors from the college campus than any other college all across the country. So you sign up for this bone marrow drive. Usually you go to a drive because one individual is sick and they're trying to get a lot of bone marrow donors to see if they can be a donor to this one individual. But when you sign up for the bone marrow drive, you're signing up for the international bone marrow list. And they can call you at any time in the future if you end up being a match for somebody. So the question is, they call you 5 years later and they say that you're a match. Right? Are you halachically obligated to go through with the donation at that stage? No bone marrow has been irradiated, nothing has happened to anybody else. You were just found to be a match. That's all. Are you halachically obligated to go through with it or not? What do you guys think? Some say no, some say yes. Give me a reason no, give me a reason yes. Yes?
You said before, like, the concept of lo ta'amod al dam re'acha, that you can't put someone's life over someone else's, so you can't be obligated to risk your life by giving a blood bone marrow donation. So I don't think you have to feel you're obligated to you have to do it.
Okay, good. Anyone want to argue the other side? That you're obligated? Anybody here want to argue that you're obligated? Yes.
We know that bone marrow cancers are not a huge risk anymore, so why would you let this person suffer and die if you can donate some bone marrow and both bone?
So the truth of the matter is that both of you guys have argued, in essence, what the poskim today argue. There is no absolute consensus on this. There are poskim like Rabbi Bleich, for example, who maintains that you could indeed coerce somebody to donate bone marrow because the risk to you is relatively small and the potential benefit to the recipient is extraordinary. And we have, and someone over here mentioned lo ta'amod al dam re'acha, we have an obligation not only as an individual to help save lives, but we have an obligation to make sure that everyone else in society does what they have to do to save lives. So the community may actually be able to enforce donation from others if the donation is relatively risk-free. But other poskim say, listen, I don't have to do this. There is a risk. I have to take medications to do it. There's a minor procedure to do it. I may not have to reach that level of risk. Now, what about kidneys? We're talking about blood and bone marrow. What about forcing someone to be a kidney donor? Does anyone think it is okay to force someone to be a kidney donor? Anybody? Anybody at all? So I think we all agree that forcing someone to be a kidney donor is a line where we're not going to cross. Why not? Because to be a kidney donor, your kidney doesn't regenerate. It's a surgical procedure. And these are things which we have to analyze as we move forward. Now let me share with you the following interesting kidney donation case. I'm going to see if you guys can come up with an answer to this. To give you, by the way, just like I said, there's a bone marrow donation organization in the Jewish community called the Gift of Life. There's actually a kidney donation organization in the Jewish community, which is called Renewal. If you guys want to Google Renewal, it's really an extraordinary organization. What they do is they match people who want to donate kidneys to people they don't even know. They just want to do a chesed. Because who was it that said you have 2 kidneys, you should donate one of those kidneys if you only have 2 kidneys. So they want to donate kidneys, but they don't know anyone who needs a donation. So they go to Renewal organization, and they're like a shidduch. They're a matchmaking organization. They'll match someone who wants to be a kidney donor to someone who wants to be a kidney recipient. And they have performed, I think it's already in the hundreds of donations between these people who want to be donors and these people who want to be recipients. It's really extraordinary. But there was a case in Israel about 5 years ago, actually probably a little longer, of a member of the parliament, the Knesset, who needed a kidney donation. And he had 5 sons. Now listen to the details here. I want to see if you guys can come up with the answer to this one. He had 5 sons. He went to the doctor, came back from the doctor. The doctor said, you would benefit from a living organ donation. One of his sons was home when he got back from the doctor. That son, found out that his Abba needed a kidney donation. He was very excited. He immediately ran to the hospital, got himself tested, and found out that he is a good match for his father. And he comes home, and he says, very excited, I'm a match for Abba, I'm going to be the kidney donor for Abba. So later that day, the rest of his brothers come home. And all 5 brothers are sitting around, and they're schmoozing. And he says, I got great news, guys. I get to be the kidney donor for Abba. So the brothers look at him and they say, what do you mean you get to be the kidney donor for Abba? What gives you that right? What about us? We want to be kidney donor for Abba. We want that schus. And the Bechor, the firstborn, says, listen, I have obligations, but I also have rights. I want to be the kidney donor to Abba, not you. So they had 5 guys that wanted to be the kidney donor to Abba. How are you going to solve this halachic dilemma? Who gets to be the kidney donor? Any ideas? Yeah. Ah, good. Whoever is the healthiest. So your first analysis is a medical analysis. I'll make it hard for you. They're all equally healthy, and they're all equally a match. Let's have somebody anyone who hasn't spoken until now. Yes? I'm sorry?
The oldest?
Oh, so the oldest? So what would be the logic for the oldest? So the oldest. So in this case, the oldest is the Bechor, and the Bechor might actually have certain rights over the others. So that is a point. We'll hold on to the Bechor as one possible. Yes?
Well, I think he should be the one who found out first, because he said he wanted to be the one to donate this kidney, and he went and he got tested first, and he did all of the vision and
Ah, very good. Good. So we have an argument here that the guy who tested first might have an advantage. Now, why is that? I mean, he just happened to be lucky enough that he was there when his father came home. But the truth of the matter is, you're onto something, and there is a halachic principle, not just rizim makdim and mitzvahs, but there is a halachic principle of kol hamaschil b'mitzvah omrim lo gemor. When someone begins the process of a mitzvah, we have an obligation to enhance or to facilitate the completion of that mitzvah. So indeed, the guy who tested himself first might have an advantage. He might have a leg up, or a kidney up in this case. So what's the final conclusion? What's the final answer? The final answer is as follows. They went to the Rav, and the Rav said, this guy who tested himself first, he has a halachic advantage. The Bechor, the oldest, as you said over there, has a halachic advantage. And they did a lottery between the Bechor and the one who tested himself first. And that's how they determined. And the Bechor ended up winning the lottery. See, this is a different kind of lottery from the short story lottery. He won the lottery, and he ended up being a kidney donor to his father, and his father lived many more healthy years after that. Now let's turn to number 4. We'll talk about this for a few moments. It's number 4 on the top of the page, refusal of care. And this is something which sort of came out in our discussions, but I don't think you guys brought out explicitly. During the trial, it is revealed that Kate asked Anna to sue for emancipation. So Anna wasn't acting on her own. It's not like Anna didn't want to save her sister. Anna wanted to donate the kidney to her sister. But her sister said, Anna wanted to donate to her sister Kate. But Kate said, don't do it. Kate said, don't donate the kidney to me. Ask for emancipation so you can refuse. So the question is, from a halachic perspective, and this came out in our discussion about the bone marrow case, can Kate refuse the kidney donation? Is she halachically allowed to refuse that kidney donation? Maybe she's not. What do you guys think? Thoughts? Yes?
No, because I know that our bodies are Hashem, and there's not, I don't think she has to stop hers.
So if it's not hers, then she should accept all treatments in order to save her life. So hold that thought and read this case, and see if you think this case is a little different. British girl allowed to refuse heart transplant. In London, Hannah Jones, 13, is not afraid of dying. She's afraid of spending her remaining days in a hospital bed. In a case that raises a host of medical and ethical issues, the British teenager from a small town northwest of London has won a battle to refuse a heart transplant operation. That decision by British medical authorities has ignited a debate over whether children should have the right to refuse potentially life-saving medical treatments, or if health authorities have an obligation to intervene. That is exactly our case. But now it's a heart transplant we're talking about, not a kidney transplant. So who thinks we should force this girl, Hannah Jones, to be, to get a heart transplant, or why shouldn't we? Or does she have a right to make that decision? What are our thoughts on that? Yes.
I don't know if it's forced, but I don't think that it should just be that she says no and then it's no. I think people should educate her, and her parents should get involved even if they don't make the final call. Because I understand not wanting to spend her last days in the hospital, but if it's hospital and possibly living or death, probably hospital and possibly living is better, objectively.
So you think we need to educate this girl, Hannah, so that she really understands what she's getting herself into, because death is a very final decision. You can't go back on that. You can't change your mind once that happens. Yes?
I think it completely depends on, first of all, how old the child is and why they're making their decision. Meaning, if they are a little child and they just don't want the surgery because they think it's stupid, then you should force them because they're killing themselves for no reason. But if they're older and they decide that they really don't want the surgery for religious reasons or something, you can't force them to go into it.
Let me add another factor. You are absolutely correct, but I'm going to add another factor to our equation, and that factor is the nature of the procedure itself and how risky the procedure is. So a heart transplant is a pretty major operation. Not everybody survives heart transplants, and even after heart transplants, there's a lot of major complications. But people do survive and people do live. So can she refuse something like a heart transplant? But let's say she needed an amputation, God forbid. Let's say she's an otherwise healthy person and has a cancer of the hand, right? And if you don't operate, the cancer will invade the rest of the body, and she won't survive. But if you remove the hand or the whole arm, then she's going to live. And let's say the kid says, I don't want this, I don't want the procedure. I'd rather die. Are you comfortable with allowing her to refuse that procedure? Or would we allow her to do that or no? Now why is that different than the heart transplant or the kidney transplant? Or is it? Yes.
There's, with a heart transplant, there's a very high risk of dying while on an operation table. With, and after also, if something doesn't go right, if with a heart transplant, after it's already been gone through it, she could die in immense pain. Whereas where she's right now, she's probably in pain, but she's doing this by her own choice of her own volition. With the hand being cut off or an arm being amputated, she's like it's not a very high risk of dying. Obviously, something could always go wrong, but the risks aren't as high as with open heart surgery.
So the main difference between those two cases is the risk versus no risk. Yes?
I think also the aftermath has to be very strongly considered. If your body rejects the heart, you may not be able to survive. If you flatline during the surgery, you will not survive. With the amputation, if you reject the prosthetic, okay, so you can get a different prosthetic. It's not like you're necessarily going to drop dead. You can get an infection from the prosthetic, but even that is very easily curable.
But by the way, just an interesting tangent. We're talking about transplants right now. We're talking about heart transplants, liver transplants, kidney transplants. So the landscape, or the way transplants have been working for the last like 30, 40 years, is that transplants have only been done for organs that you need to save your life, like a liver, like a kidney, like a heart. But now, in the 21st century, they are doing what are called non-vital organ transplants. So these are the type of organs that are now being transplanted. They're transplanting hands. People who got their hands blown off in the war are now having hand transplants. They're now experimenting with leg transplants. They're doing transplants of the larynx, the voice box, for people who had trauma to that area. You know, so I always joke, if a man gets the larynx of a woman, is that considered kol isha or not? They're doing uterus transplants, transplanting the human womb, uterus. There have been almost a dozen uterus transplants. There have been a number in Sweden. It's now coming to the United States. There was the first case of a child born from a uterus transplant here in the United States this year. Here's an interesting halachic question for you guys. You guys know the halachos of pidyon haben? You know what pidyon haben is? So think about this interesting question. If you have a woman who she was born without a womb, without a uterus. She receives a donation of a uterus from another woman who had a number of children already. And now the uterus is transplanted into this woman, and she now is pregnant with her first born male child. Do you do a pidyon haben in that case or not? What do you guys think about that? Your thoughts on that? Yeah. What do you say? So good question. Is it Peter Rechem? Whose Rechem is it? Is it the recipient's Rechem? Is it the donor's Rechem? If it starts anew, and if it takes on a whole new identity of the recipient, then it is a Peter Rechem for her. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But here's the, you got any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
Why would you be doing an Avera if you haven't been doing an Avera instead?
Oh, good. So you're not doing an Avera. If it's a suffix, then you do a pidyon haben without a bracha.
Yeah.
Right, you can do without a bracha. So you're not, no harm, no foul. You can do a pidyon haben without a bracha. It's not a bad thing.
If the mother wasn't Jewish, from the person that they took the uterus from, would the child be Jewish?
Ah, good question. This opens up a whole nother, I think we need another 40 minutes for this one. If the uterus that they took came from a non-Jew, does that impact the halachic status of the child? So the answer is no. It probably does not. But let's say a woman, just to open up a whole other discussion, which we're not going to have today, let's say a woman doesn't have her own ovaries, but has her own womb. And then you take a donor, someone who donates an egg, and you take the egg from a non-Jew, use the reproductive seed of her husband, and implant it into the Jewish woman, and now the Jewish woman gives birth to the child. Is such a child considered halachically Jewish or not halachically Jewish? Something to think about, many more things to think about. So just in conclusion of our discussion today, first of all, I want to thank you all. I'm going to give you guys a big round of applause for your tremendous participation and tremendous insights. But the point, I think the point we learned today is the following. Today was book day, and today was question day. We took a simple book, a very popular book, one of the most popular books in this country, and we showed how much there is just in this book that we can discuss from a halachic perspective. It gives us an appreciation that as Torah-observant Jews, we have what to say about everything that goes on in this world. Hopefully, after today, we'll continue reading books and continue asking questions, and I look forward to seeing you again in other such circumstances.